But in every life, there comes a moment where we realize that you will not achieve everything that you want to accomplish. Now, we have a name for this. We call it the midlife crisis.
Welcome to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith. I'm David Pick. And Colin, I've got to ask, have you had your midlife crisis yet?
Great, yeah.
There are more books in my library than I will be able to read in their entirety in my lifetime. I think everyone comes to a point, at some point in life, where you realize that you will not be able to fulfill all of your dreams. And we're looking at a place in the Bible where that is the case. King David wanted to build a temple for God, has to come to realize that although he makes all the preparations, it will be his son Solomon who's able to bring that to completion. Now, navigating the awareness that I will not be able to do everything that I at one stage may have thought that I would do. That's really significant. The only person who was ever truly able to say it is finished was Jesus Christ our Lord. We live with the unfinished, with the incomplete, and the scriptures are going to speak to us about how to do that today.
I'm glad about that because many of us are right in the middle of that at the moment. So join us if you can in Psalm 132 as we begin the message from trying to trusting. Here is Colin.
I want you to imagine the scene. Saul has been the king among God's people for 20 years, and the whole thing has been an absolute disaster. Saul was the kind of man who promised much but delivered little, looked magnificent but lacked substance. At the end of his life, you find him defeated in battle, surrounded by his enemies, the Philistines. He gives up hope, falls on his sword, takes his own life. It is a low point for God's people, but as so often, it is really the beginning of better things. A new king came to the throne, and his name was David. Augustine says that the name David means strong hand, and David sure was a strong leader. He also had a heart after God. The Bible tells us that. And when David comes on the scene, he is determined to make a difference. Spiritual life in the nation is in a desperate state, and he wants to change the spiritual climate. He wants the world to look different when he goes out from the way that it looked when he came in. He's saying, as it were, to God at the beginning of his reign, Lord, I'm your man for this time, for this generation. David was a man with a big vision. Now, that's a marvelous thing, because nothing happens in this life without vision, without energy, without drive, without direction, without passion. And David had all of that in abundance. And in Psalm 132, now we have his son Solomon looking back on his father's life. And of all of the things that he could write from David's life, he picks out just two. You want to know about my father David? I'll tell you two things. Number one, he made a promise to God. Number two, God made a promise to him. And that's really what Psalm 132 is all about. David's promise to God, verse 2, God's promise to David, verse 11. Now let's look at these two together, and then I think we're going to see that they speak very, very powerfully to our lives today. First then, David's promise to God. Please follow in your Bible as you have it open. Notice what his promise was. Verse 3, I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will allow no sleep to my eyes, nor slumber to my eyelids, till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. Now, this is referring to the great story in the Old Testament of the Ark of the Covenant. I think this is one of the most fascinating stories in the Old Testament. If you don't know it, it's a great Bible story to know. If you do know it, I think you'll probably enjoy hearing it again. The Ark of the Covenant was a wooden box. It was about 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet high. It was carried on poles by the Levites when God's people were traveling through the desert. Inside the box, you know what was inside the ark? 3 things inside the ark. There was a golden pot that contained manna that spoke of God's provision for his people. God provides for us. There was Aaron's rod that budded, which reminds us of the miracle by which our life is sustained. And then beyond that, there were the copies of the Ten Commandments engraved on the tablets of stone. Now, on top of the box, there was a lid or a cover. And on this lid or cover, there were two statues of cherubim. The cherubim were angelic figures. You first come across them in the Bible guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden. Remember, after Adam and Eve were sent out, expelled on account of their sin, there was no way back, and it was cherubim that made sure that they didn't attempt to come back. So cherubim in the Bible always speak of the judgment of God. That is what they represent. And there were these two statues of cherubim on top of the lid or cover of the ark. Now, the most important thing about the ark was this, that God said specifically, I will meet you there. Exodus 25 and verse 22. In fact, God's very specific. He says, there, above the cover, between the two cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony, I will meet with you. In fact, that area between these two carved statues was sometimes referred to as God's footstool. The picture you see was of God in all his glory and majesty and his feet resting on this area. This was the meeting point in which God would come down and draw near in his presence to these Old Testament believers. And here is what happened. On one special day in the year that was called the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go into a tent area that surrounded this Ark of the Covenant, and he would take blood of a sacrificed animal, and he would sprinkle that blood on the area of the lid between the two cherubim. It was also known as the mercy seat. And this is full of symbolism in the Bible, you see, because God's grace, God's mercy, God's forgiveness was released in the place of judgment by the application of the blood of a sacrifice, all of which is teaching us what Jesus would do and why we needed that to be done. So the ark was obviously of immense importance, the meeting place of God and his people in the Old Testament. It was the heart of the spiritual life of the nation. Now, it was with God's people throughout the time when they traveled in the desert. But when they got into the land of Canaan, they began to neglect spiritual things, and that was true pretty much throughout the years of King Saul. On one occasion, when they were defeated in battle, someone came up with a suggestion, maybe we should take the ark into our next fight with us. And so they took it into their next battle. And of course, you could predict that's never going to work. You can't be resisting God and then try and use him to make things work out right for you. And so what happened was that Israel was defeated, and not only defeated, but the ark was captured by the Philistines, who took it off and placed it in the temple of their god, an idol called Dagon. So the ark was in Dagon's temple. They locked the temple up for the night, and when the priests of Dagon came back the next morning, you know what had happened? In the night, Dagon, the idol, had fallen off his stand and was lying smashed on the floor in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Well, the Philistines, of course, didn't like this one bit. They decided that they didn't want things that go bump in the night in their temple of Dagon, and so they decided the very best thing they could do is get rid of the Ark. And what followed after that was a long, long story of the ark being moved from one town to another, one place to another, and wherever the ark came, trouble seemed to follow. And so in the end, the Philistines said, hey, we've had enough of this. We'll give the ark back to the Israelites, and maybe it'll do trouble for them instead of us. And so it comes back into Israel. And to cut a long story short, it ends up in a little-known town called Kiriath Jearim, where it was put into storage in a barn on a farm owned by a man by the name of Abinadab. And there it was forgotten throughout the entire period of the reign of Saul for 20 years. Imagine it, the central point of the spiritual life of a nation wrapped up and lost somewhere in a rural farmyard. for 20 years. Until David came to the throne. And when David came to the throne, he was determined that things were going to change big time in the nation. He wanted first then to bring the symbol of the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, to the very center of national life, which was, of course, the city of Jerusalem. And so he says here, this is what his vow is about. He's not going to rest until he brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, until he makes a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. Well, of course, the first problem was that nobody knew where the ark was. I mean, what do you do when you're going searching for a lost ark after 20 years? You can't search the internet. You can't put an advert on television. So what David did, evidently, was he went back to his own hometown. David came from Bethlehem. And the thing to do if you're trying to find out something that went missing 20 years ago is look up some old guys. And I guess he found some older people there, and in Bethlehem he got a tip-off as to where it might be. Someone remembered a story, a rumor, that it had ended up in the little-known rural town of Kiriath Jearim. Now, if you look at verse 6, that is what it's all about. You see, it says there, we heard about it in Ephrata. Now, Ephrata, of course, was the ancient name for Bethlehem. Remember Micah the prophet? It gets read every year at Christmas time. Out of you, Bethlehem Ephrata. You see, that was the old name for Bethlehem. Will come a ruler who will shepherd his people Israel. So David comes to Bethlehem and he hears the story that it's evidently in Kiriath Jearim. And so he says, we heard of it in Ephrata. We came upon it, verse 6, in the fields of Jar. Now, if you have a New International Version and extremely good eyesight, you will see that there is a footnote there in the page on your Bible, if you look right down the bottom, and it will tell you there that the fields of Jar are, of course, a reference to none other than Kiriath Jearim, where the ark had been lying, forgotten in the house of Abinadab for 20 years. So, David and his mighty men go to Kiriath Jearim. They bring the ark back to Jerusalem, where David had already pitched a tent to house it. But of course, that was only a temporary measure. His long-term plan was for something far grander. It was that he should build the temple, which would be the magnificent housing for the centerpiece of the spiritual life of the nation, the Ark of the Covenant. So I think of this, it really must be rather like finding a magnificent piece of American history on a farm in Idaho and bringing it to the Senate in Washington. You see, it's that kind of significance in national life. Now that brings us to the main point of the psalm. David brought the ark to Jerusalem, but he was not able to complete his dream of building the temple. His big dream was to create this place for the presence of God, this housing for the ark, this temple of God. But he couldn't complete what he had planned. He couldn't deliver what he'd promised.
You're listening to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith and a message called From Trying to Trusting, part of our series, Moving in the Right Direction, all about the Psalms of Ascent. And if you've missed any of the series, or if you tuned in late today, or if you have to leave early, you can always catch up or go back and listen again online at our website, openthebible.org.uk. Back to the message now. We're in Psalm 132. Here again is Colin.
Now, David was, of course, one of the three great heroes of the Old Testament. If you're to pick any three from the Old Testament as the greats, you're surely going to go with Abraham, Moses, and David. Magnificent achievements. But you see, even David was not able to do everything that was in his heart. And you see, that is the pattern of all of our lives, isn't it? If David wasn't able to do everything in his heart with all his resources and all his opportunities, you're not going to be able to do everything that's in your heart, and I'm not going to be able to do everything that's in my heart. Most of us set out on life with a dream of what we want to accomplish. And that's a good thing. You have a dream about marriage. You have a dream about family. You have a dream about how it will be with your children. You have a dream of your career, of travel, of financial independence. You have a dream of creating something. You have a dream of building a business. You have a dream of having an impact for Christ. You have a dream of touching the life of some person who is in desperate need and pouring yourself into changing their experience. But in every life, there comes a moment where we realize that you will not achieve everything that you want to accomplish. Now, we have a name for this. We call it the midlife crisis, right? Actually, all the midlife crisis is the first intimation of our mortality. It's the first sneaking suspicion that I may not fulfill all of my dreams after all. I may not become everything that I'd hoped after all. That I may run out of time, that I may run out of opportunity, that I may run out of resource. And that for all that I may achieve and become and accomplish, it's not going to be everything that's there in the dream. The projects that you were not able to accomplish, the relationship that did not work out as you had hoped, the children who are not following in the path you had led them in, the ministry that did not fulfill its early purpose, the work into which you poured yourself and then it turned and moved in a different direction. And however much you may have been able to achieve of your initial vision, there will always be that part of you that will say, I would have liked to have. And then you'll complete that sentence. For David, it would have been, for all that God enabled me to do, I really would have liked to have built the temple. I really would. I really would. Thinking about David's vow, it's made me think about my vows again. Vows are a wonderful thing. When you make them, you identify the central navigating points of your life. You should only ever have a few. You sure need to remember what they are. I've only made 4 vows. I don't expect to make any others. I'll give you them in the chronological order in which they were made in my life. The first was a vow to follow Christ. I made that on the day that I was baptized. The second was a vow of love and of loyalty to Karen, made on the day that we were married. The third was a vow to be faithful to the Scriptures, made on the day that I was ordained as a pastor. And the fourth was made on 2 occasions, and that was a vow to raise our children, Andrew and David, in the ways of Christ, made, of course, on the occasions when our 2 boys were dedicated. Now, these 4 vows are very simply the sacred navigating points of my life. They define who I am. I'm a Christian, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a pastor. 4 vows. I've got to tell you, I am still working on every one of them. I'm still working on being a better Christian. I'm still working on being a better husband. I'm still working on being a better father. And I'm still working on being a better pastor. And the truth is that these things will never be complete. I will never come to a point where I have done everything that I wanted to do. I will never come to a point where I have become everything that I wanted to be. And so the question is, how can I find rest? See, that's the problem for David, isn't it? Look back at verses 3 and 4 again. Look at his vow. I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will not allow sleep to my eyes nor slumber to my eyelids till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. That's until I've built the temple to house the ark. That's what he's referring to. Well, that's not a lot of sleep, is it? Considered he never got it done. See, you can't get much stronger commitment than David's. Obviously, he's not saying to us that he never slept for the rest of his life. What he's saying is that he poured himself into his life's work. Here is a man who is driving relentlessly after the pursuit of his vision. He's made a marvelous promise and he says, I can't ever give up on it. I'm pursuing it with everything that is within me. The question, of course, is how then do we avoid destroying ourselves in the relentless pursuit of what we can never ultimately achieve? And isn't that the story of so many lives? The drivenness of trying to achieve something you can never quite complete, the relentlessness trying to become something that is just beyond your grasp. You experience that?
I think we can all relate to that, and that's possibly why you might want to listen to this message again. The message is called From Trying to Trusting, and it's part of our series Moving in the Right Direction, based on the Psalms of Ascent, Psalms 120 to 134. And you'll find Pastor Colin's messages on this subject on our website, openthebible.org.uk. Open the Bible is able to stay on the radio and on the internet because of the very generous donations made by our listeners. So if you already give to support Open the Bible, thank you so much. If that's something that you've been considering doing in the future, each month we aim to offer a special gift in return for setting up a new support payment for Open the Bible. If you're able to set up a new monthly direct debit of £5 per month or more, or a one-off gift of £50 or more, we'd love to say thank you by sending you a copy of Colin Smith's book, Fly Through the Bible. Here's Open the Bible's Amanda Cunningham to talk about the book and also about some other exciting resources which are free for everyone to receive.
Thanks, David. Well, if you've been listening for a while, you will of course know that each month we give away a free book when you support our ministry, either with a one-off gift of £50 or more, or by setting up a new direct debit of at least £5. But this July and August, we've got something even bigger going on. We're running a special campaign packed with free resources, all designed to help you open the Bible with others. Because let's face it, that's not always easy to do. So yes, when you donate, you will still receive a free copy of Fly Through the Bible. But this summer, everyone can access a range of free tools. First, there's a video series with Colin Smith walking through each session of the Fly Through the Bible course on our website. Great for personal study or for small groups. Second, we've got a free app. Just head to your app store and search Fly Through the Bible. Could you invite a friend for coffee this week and go through it together? Or if you're a church leader thinking ahead to your autumn small groups, we've got you covered. Head to openthebible.org.uk/fly to download a free small group discussion guide with questions for every session. We're praying these resources will encourage and equip you, whether you're reading the Bible on your own or with others. And honestly, what better place to start than a journey through the Bible story?
Thanks, Amanda. You can access these free resources at our website, openthebible.org.uk, and you can download the Fly app at the Apple App Store or Google Play. Our offer to send you a copy of Colin's book, Fly Through the Bible, is available all this month. Full details, terms and conditions are on our website, openthebible.org.uk, and you can give online. Please do be sure to leave your address details when you donate online in order to receive your free book. For Open the Bible, Pastor Colin Smith, I'm David Pick, and I hope you'll join us again next time. Do you ever feel as if you're on a spiritual treadmill, that you can't quite do enough to make God happy? If so, you should move from trying to trusting. Find out how next time on Open the Bible.